there's an old saying, just because you can't see something doesn't mean it's not there. My work it's a reflection of myself. What I wanted to do is to show the world that the little things can be the biggest things. We all seem to think that, if we look down on the ground, there's nothing there. And we use the word nothing. Nothing doesn't exist because there's always something. My mother told me that when I was a child, that I should always respect the little things. What made me do this work, I shall go into my story. It's quite a little story, but I shall go into it. This all started when I was age 5. What made me do it? At school, I will admit this, academically I couldn't express myself, so I was more or less classed as nothing. So my world was seen as less. So I decided I didn't really want to be a part of that world. So I thought I need to retreat into something else. So when my mother used to take me to school, she thought I was at school, and I used to do a U-turn when her back was turned and run off and hide in the shed at the back of the garden. Now, the one time I was in the shed and my mother suspected something, thinking I was at school. And my mother was like the woman in Tom and Jerry. So you just see her feet. So I was hiding in the shed like that, and all of a sudden, and then I saw her legs, and then she said, grabbed me like that, because my mother's quite big, and she lifted me up and she says, "How come you're not at school?" And I told her I couldn't face it because the way the teacher was treating me, ridiculing me, and using me as an example of failure. So I told her. But at that age, obviously I couldn't really express it that way, but I told her I didn't feel right. And then she just said, "You're going back to school tomorrow," and walked off. And I didn't expect that, because I expected one of these. But I didn't get it. So I'm sitting there thinking. And then as I looked down on the ground, I noticed there were some ants running around. And I went into this little fantasy world, and I thought, these ants, are they looking for the queen ant? Or do they need somewhere to live? So I thought, perhaps if I make these ants some apartments, they'll move in. So I did. And how I set about that, I got some splinters of wood, and I sliced these little splinters of wood with a broken shard of glass, constructed this little apartment. Well, it looked like a little shanty shed when I finished, but I thought perhaps the ant won't know, it'll probably move in, and so I did. That was a bit crude at the time, and I made all these little apartments and little merry-go-rounds, seesaws and swings, little ladders. And then I encouraged the ants to come round by putting sugar and things like that. And then I sat down, and all the ants came along, and all I could hear was, "Is this for us?" And I said, "Yes, they're all for you." And they moved in and decided not to pay me any rent. I'll get to the serious bit. And from there, I was watching this little world, and it became a part of me. When I discovered that I had this gift, I wanted to experiment with this world that we can't see, because ants are very intelligent. So I realized that there was more to life than just everything that we see around us. That's huge. So I started to educate myself on this molecular level. And as I got older, I continued. I showed my mother. My mother told me to take it smaller. Now, I shall show you something here, and I'll explain. As you can see, that's a pinhead. Now, that is called the Huff House. The gentleman who commissioned me to do this was a gentleman called Peter Huff. And he says to me, "Willard, can you put my house on a pinhead?" So I says, "How are you going to fit in there?" And then he said to me, "I don't believe you can do it. Can you really do it?" And I says, "Well, try me." And then he said, "But I don't believe that you can do this." So I said, "Okay." So I cut a long story short. I went home, went underneath the microscope, and I crushed up a piece of glass, crushed it up. And underneath the microscope, there were splinters of glass. Some of them were quite jagged. So I was crushing up these pieces of glass, which, as you can see, that's the actual frame of the house. And the actual roof is made up of a fibre which I found in my sister's old teddy bear. So I got the teddy bear and I said, "Do you mind if I pull out one of your fibres?" So I did. And I looked at it underneath the microscope, and it was flat. So that I decided to slice these up with the tools that I make. I sharpen the end of a needle into a blade, and then I actually slow down my whole nervous system, and then I work between my heartbeat, and I have 1.5 seconds to actually move. And at the same time, I have to watch I don't inhale my own work at the same time. Because that has happened to me. So what I did, like I said, come back to the glass. I found these little bits of glass, and I had to make them square. So I'm thinking, how can I do this? So what I did, I got a oil stone, broke the edge of an oil stone off. And what I did, I took pieces of glass and I started to rub them. I used a little tweezer which I made from an air clip, and I built up rubber around the end of the tweezer so it wouldn't crush the glass. And then I started rubbing very, very gently until some of the edges were quite square. And then I constructed it. And how I constructed it is by making grooves in the top of the pinhead and then pushing the glass in with its own friction. And as I was doing it, what happened, the instrument that I used turned into a catapult, and it went like this. And then that was it. Gone. So I'm thinking, Mr. Huff isn't going to be very happy when I told him his house has gone to another, into the atmosphere somewhere. So, cut the story short, I decided that I had to go back and do it. So I found some more, and I decided to sort of construct it very, very slowly, holding my breath, working between my heartbeat, and making sure everything's level. Because it's such a small sculpture, yet nothing can go wrong. And I decided to build it up. Then I used fibres out of my jumper, which I held and stretched and made the beams going around the house. And the actual windows and the balcony had to be sort of constructed. I used money spider's web to actually attach certain things, which sent me insane. But I managed to do it. And when I finished it, I came back the next day and noticed the house was occupied. Have we ever heard of a dust mite? Darren Dust Mite and his family had moved in. So basically, I'd completed the house, and there you are. Right. Right, as you can see, Bart Simpson is having a little argument. I think they're arguing about the space on the pin. There's not enough room for the two of them. So I didn't think he was going to throw Bart off. I think he was just warning him, actually. But this one was made out of a nylon tag out of my shirt. What I did, I plucked the tag out and put it underneath the microscope. I used a needle, which has got a slight blade on the end. Can anybody see the blade on the end of that needle? So what I did is the same process where I just kind of hold my breath and just work away very, very slowly, manipulating the plastic, cutting it, because it behaves different. Whenever you work on that level, things behave different because it's on this molecular level. Things change and they act different. And sometimes they turn into little catapults and things go up in the air and, all different things happen. But I had to make a little barrier going around it out of cellophane to stop it moving. Then static electricity set in and it went and I'm trying to remove it and the static's interfering with everything. So, there's sweat dripping off my head because I have to carve Homer Simpson like that in that position. And after I've cut out the shape, then I have to make sure that there's room for Bart's neck. So after I've done the same thing, then I have to paint it. And after I've actually sculpted them, I have to paint them. I experimented with I found a dead fly and I plucked the hair off the fly's head, decided to make a paintbrush. But I would never do it to a living fly. Because I've heard a fly in pain and they go, even though they get on our nerves, I would never kill an insect because, all creatures great and small. There's a hymn that says that. So what I decided to do is to pluck fine hair out of my face. And I looked at it underneath the microscope. That was the paintbrush. And whilst I'm painting, I have to be very careful because the paint starts to turn into little blobs and it starts to dry very quickly. So I have to be very quick. If I'm not, it'll end up looking not like what it's supposed to look like. It could end up looking like Humpty Dumpty or somebody else. So I have to be very, very careful. So this one took me approximately, I would say, 6 to 7 weeks. My work, rough estimate, sometimes 5, 6 to 7 weeks. You can't always anticipate. It's very painstaking work, but the best things come in small packages. As you can see, that's Charlton Heston brought down to size. He says to me, Willard, as you can see him saying, why me? I says, I enjoyed your film, that's why. As you can see, there's an aphid fly there. That's just to show the scale and the actual size of the sculpture. I would say it probably measures a 1/4 of a millimetre. In America, they say a period stop. So I would say if you cut a period stop in half, or full stop, that's about the size of the whole thing. The chariot's made of gold, and Charlton Heston is made of a floating fibre which I took out the air. When the sunlight comes through the window, you see these little fibres. And what I normally do is walk around the room trying to find one. And then I put it underneath the microscope. I remember one time I was doing it and the window was open and there was a lady standing by the bus stop and she saw me walking around like this. And then she looked at me and then I went and then she went, oh, okay, he's not mad. Yeah, to actually do this thing, the actual chariot is made of gold. I had a 24-carat gold ring, and I cut off a little flake of gold, and then I bent it round, and made it into the chariot. And the horse is made from nylon, and the spider's web is for the reins on the horse. To get the symmetrical shape of the horse was very difficult, because I had to get the horse to rear up and look as though it was sort of in some kind of action. When I did this one, a gentleman seen it and said to me, "There's no way you can do this. You must have used some kind of machine. There's no way a man can do that. It must be a machine." So I said, "Okay, then if you say it's a machine." That one took me approximately 6 weeks. The most famous statue in the world. This one, I would say, was a serious challenge, because I had to put the torch on the top. That one is more or less the same type of process. The bottom of it is carved from a grain of sand, because I wanted to get a bit of a stone effect. I used a microscopic shard of diamond to actually carve the actual base. Well, I can look at this one and I can be very proud of this, because that statue has always sort of kept an image in my head of, the beginning of people coming to America. So it's sort of Ellis Island and seeing America for the first time, and that's the first thing they saw. So I wanted to have that little image, and this is it. And we all know that is the Hulk. I wanted to create movement in the eye of a needle, because, as we know, we see needles, but people are not familiar with the eye of a needle, but apart from putting the thread through it. So I broke the needle and made the needle look like the Hulk's broken it. I had to make little holes in the base of the needle to shove his feet in. So most of my work, I don't use glue. They're going with their own friction. And that's how I managed to do it. So it was a sort of as you can see, he's looking at the moment. He's got a little grimace on his face. And his mouth must be probably about 3 microns. So the eyes are probably about 1 micron or something. That ship there, that's made from 24-carat gold. And I normally rig it with the web of a money spider, but I had to rig it with strands of glue, because the web of the spider, it was sending me insane because I couldn't get the web to move off. And that's 24-carat gold, and it's constructed. I built it, constructed each plank of gold, and the whole thing is sort of symmetrical. The flag had to be made out of little strands of gold. It's almost like doing a surgical operation to get this thing right. As you can see, dressage. It's something I wanted to do just to show how I could get the symmetrical shape. The actual rigging on the reins on the horse made from the same sort of thing. And that was done with a particle from my shirt. And the pinhead, I've made greenery on there by scraping the particles off a green shirt and then pressed onto the needle.